First of all, thank you all for joining me. I appreciate it. This is the first ever Chaburah in Chai Israel history.
Woo! Woo!
Alright.
This is Chai Yesod.
Okay. So like this. First of all, I'd like to thank Hashem for giving me this amazing opportunity with Rabbi to push me to do this, because it never would have happened without Rav Noah. So thank you, Rav Noah. Thank you, Rabbi Ernie, for making the noodles. Thank you, Rabbi Christmas. Rabbi Ernie. I like this. Oh, the popcorn. We forgot the popcorn.
Mendel, we went there yesterday.
Do you want to go get the popcorn? Okay, like this. It's in the office.
Also get the chicken.
Okay, so like this. Does anybody here, by raise of hands, not like challah?
Not like what?
Challah. Does anyone not like challah over here? Two people?
Go back to that.
So basically, last night, Rabbi Kubis and I were preparing to make a challah. And you know, like, it's a good introduction for what I'm about to say next. Let's say you have a fleshik challah, and whatever happened, a drop of milk fell into that piece of meat that was in the challah, right? And it dispersed within the challah. Are you allowed to eat that challah? Is it still kosher? Because it's a meat challah and like a drop of milk, dairy, came into the challah. Does anybody know? Do you throw it out?
No.
No Shanavet can answer.
I would say it's still kosher.
Still kosher?
You still eat it depending on how much the ratio.
The Bavarian knows.
Okay, very good, very good, very good. So the answer is that yes, you could still eat the challah. Why? Because there's something called BItol. Okay? Now I know like ESPN, whoever watches Sports Center, they have like the rundown of like things that are gonna. So I made a rundown for you guys, so you guys know. Okay? Now, markers.
Laser pointer.
No, we don't have that yet. Alright, BItol. What is BItol? BItol is where you have two different items. They have to be different, that's the key word. And you have a majority of one item, and a minority of the other item. The majority takes over the minority, meaning that the minority takes over the form of the majority. So like by the challah. The majority was the challah, the meat. You had a little minority of milk, which was taken over by the meat challah, meaning that it was all kosher. BItol only happens where something is not nicker. Nicker means if it's noticeable. If you can still see the milk, you can't do it. But if it like dropped in and it like sort of like assimilated itself within the challah, it's kosher. Okay? Now, that is the case of a min v'she'eno mina, where it's two different items. You have the milk and you have the meat. Something that's min vamino is two similar items. BItol only happens when the two items are different. Therefore, BItol only happens when you have a min v'she'eno mina. But if you have a min vamino when they're the same, BItol doesn't work. Now there's a case, a ran and a darm.
What would be a case? Obviously, questions are always different.
Questions were occurred to be after.
Yeah, no questions always. Now, the ran and the darm brings machlokas as to how things are different within BItol. Rabbi Yehuda says physically they have to be the same. Meaning, if it's the same physically, then there's no BItol. It's similar enough, meaning it's not different. The Rabbanon hold the halachic status has to be the same. Now, let's say if you have like a pile of kosher meat, and let's say you have one piece of usher meat falls into it. Would there be BItol or not in that case? According to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds it's the physical, you go after the physical, meaning the physical form, since they're both meat and meat, therefore they have something similar, therefore there's no BItol in that case, and you cannot eat that meat. Now, according to Rabbanon, who holds it's the halachic status of that, well, since one is aser and one is mutter, then you can eat it because there's BItol, because there's two different things going against each other. So the majority takes over the minority. Okay? Now, let's say I have a case where you have like a pile of kosher potatoes. And let's say you have a non-kosher piece of meat that falls into the potatoes. Is there BItol or not? The obvious answer is yeah, there's BItol. Because if they're be'etzim different, meaning that if it's like a potato and meat, that's like the best difference you can get. It just makes sense like that. Okay? Now, there's a concept called Duvar shiyaish lo mateerin, which means if you have some item that's of one halachic status, that will later on become a different halachic status. For example, Let's say, for some reason, I made a neder, I made a promise to myself that I will not touch this piece of meat until 4 hours. So until now, in 4 hours, that piece of meat is usher to eat. I cannot touch it. But after 4 hours is over, it's mutter, I'm allowed to eat it. Okay? That is a case of a Duvar shiyaish lo mateerin. Now, in a case of Duvar shiyaish lo mateerin, let's say, if you have this usher piece of meat that I was not allowed to eat till 4 hours, falls into a kosher meat. Let's say when I made the neder, it was 12 p.m. Meaning at 4 p.m. it will be kosher to eat. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, would there be BItol in that case? No, because it's both meat falling into meat. But according to the Rabbanon hold it goes after the halachic status. What do we go by? Because at one point it will become kosher. So we say that since at one time after it will become kosher, therefore it has a similarity with the kosher meat, therefore there's no BItol in that case. Okay? That's something called a Duvar shiyaish lo mateerin. Fine. Now.
Pass the popcorn.
Yeah, pass the popcorn around, guys. Now, Tosfos in Avodah Zarah Daf Samach Hamad Beis, Tosfos in Avodah Zarah Daf Samach Hamad Beis brings the case of this. Let's say you have a beged that's made of, let's say, 99% wool and 1% linen. What's that beged called? Shatnez, right? You're not allowed to wear shatnez. It's usher to wear. So from what we know about BItol, right, where you have two different things going, would you say that, well, shatnez you're not allowed to wear, the two things are going against each other. So the 99% of wool in that beged will take over that 1% of linen in that beged, right? Right? Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yeah.
Wrong. You guys are all wrong. That's not what happens. Why? Because BItol is two different things that are different within each other. So by the case of Shatnez, we have that beged that's 99% wool, 1% linen. If you would strip that 99% wool, would you be able to wear that? Yeah, there's nothing wrong with wearing that. If you would take that 1% of linen and wear it, would you be able to wear it? Yeah, 100%. No question, Sylvia. So, it's only when they come together in the form of a beged, makes it so that it's just usher to wear. But they're not fighting each other. It's not Ritzak Yankees, they don't hate each other. It's just that when they come together, it's usher to wear. But separately, they're fine, they're not different. Therefore, there would be no BItol in that case. Okay. Now, this is where it gets a little complicated. Rabbi Chia brings down a case of Schutah and Niveylah. Schutah is meat that was properly shechted, right? You go to the shechting place, whatever it's called, and you see a guy and he's whatever, and bam, he cuts the cow's head off, whatever, and it's kosher, 100% kosher. He did it in a kosher way. And a Niveylah. Niveylah is meat that was not properly shechted, or it was like an animal that died on its own. Therefore, it like gives off a tumah to it. Okay? Now he brings down this case of, let's say you have. I should write this down.
How are we supposed to do it?
Okay. He brings down this case of, let's say you have, I don't know, let's say this is whatever meat that's not kosher, right? This is the Niveylah that falls into two pieces of Schutah. Would there be BItol in that case? Let's say they both look exactly like, you can't tell which is which. So he says there's a machlokas as to how you look at BItol in this case. He says the Rav Chisda says you look at the mevatel. The mevatel is the thing that's taking over the majority. So this would be the mevatel, Schutah in this case. Now, according to Rav Chisda, can Schutah ever become like Niveylah? Meaning, can something that was properly shechted become like it wasn't properly shechted? No, absolutely not. So in this case, he holds since this can never become like this, they have a difference, meaning they're not similar, and there's BItol in that case, and you'll be able to eat all three. Now, let's say the other way. Let's say you have a piece of Schutah that falls into two pieces of Niveylah. Now, since he says you go after the mevatel, the thing that's taking over this thing, can Niveylah ever become like Schutah? Yes, it can. I'll tell you how. what's the problem with, Niveylah can ever become like Schutah? The problem with Niveylah is that it gives off Tumah. But, let's say if you would leave this meat out and it would start to decay, it loses its form of Tumayness. And since it's not Tumay, it's good. So therefore, yeah, Niveylah could become like Schutah. Since it could become like the other one, it has a similarity, okay? There is no BItol, because they're the same and they're not different. Okay? That is Rav Chisda. Rav Chanina says, no. You go after the BItol. The BItol is the thing that's being taken over. So in the first case, this is the thing that's being BItol. It's being taken over by this. So he says, can the Niveylah ever become like Schutah? We just said, yeah, it could be. So since it could be, it has a similarity, then there's no BItol. Now, in the bottom case, can Schutah become like Niveylah? No, because something that was properly shefted cannot become like it wasn't properly shefted. That makes no sense. Therefore, there would be BItol in that case. Because they're different, this can never become like that. Okay? Now, Rashi brings down a contradiction between these two models. Let's say you have a case, according to both of them, you each have one problem. Okay? Let's say you have a case where this or this or this or this, and depending on how you look at it, let's say there's no BItol. Meaning if there's no BItol, you don't know which is which, because they're both the same, and you don't know whether this one is kosher or whether this one is asur to eat. Okay? So let's say, now you have these, right? Let's say the end result is you have 3 pieces of meat. You know that 2 of them are kosher, and 1 of them is not kosher, but you just don't know which meat is which. Let's say a piece of truma touches these 3 meats. Okay. The only way to burn truma, meaning if truma goes bad, the only way to burn it is if you know it's 100% asur. And the only way you could eat it is if you know it's 100% kosher. So now if it touches one of these 3 pieces of meat, you don't know which one is kosher and you don't know which one is asur. Because let's say there would have been BItol in this case, or in this case, that would make all 3 of them either 100% kosher, in which if the truma touched it, it would be kosher to eat because it's all kosher, it did nothing wrong. Or let's say if there is BItol, and it would make it so all 3 of these were asur. You cannot eat them. So if it touched them, since truma is 100% asur, you could burn it. But since you don't know, what do? It touched it. So we realize it's a suffix. And suffix you do l'chumrah, meaning you just leave it. You can't eat it, but you can't burn it. So you just leave it there, okay? That's what Rashi brings us here, and you have it in both of the cases according to Chisda and Rav Chanina.
Sweet.
That's good stuff. Okay.
I don't have
Okay. There's a Gemorah Succah that says, if you have 2 carbon minchas, a carbon mincha is a carbon that's composed of flour, water, oil, and frankincense, whatever that is. And that's what a carbon mincha is. The Gemara says there that what you do is you take a kaimitz. A kaimitz is like a fistful to put on the mizbeach, okay? And then after you take a fistful from mincha A, a kaimitz from mincha A, you can then take a fistful of kaimitz from mincha B. Okay? So let's say we're going to take. Okay? Fine. The only problem is that we know by carbon mincha, before it was brought, before kaimitz was taken out of it, it couldn't be added. It could be nothing that could be added onto it, and there could be nothing that is removed from it. So we have a problem. Let's say, in this case over here, where you have 2 carbon minchas that overlap each other, and you're not sure which is the majority for BItol or not. So let's say, for argument's sake, that this side was BItol. Was BItol, yeah. Meaning that all of a sudden, this piece over here, it subtracted it from B. So now we have a problem, because once you take from Mincha A, something was missing from Mincha B. So how can the Gemara say that? Well, after you take the comes from Mincha A, you take the comes from Mincha B.
Why is that a problem?
Because
It has to be shown when you take it.
it has to, you can't remove anything or add anything from Mincha B. So over here, if there's BItol in this case, and let's say Mincha A took over it, then you're removing from Mincha B. Okay. Now the typical case that we've been talking about of BItol is where something usher, minority, falls into something that's the majority. Meaning to say, let's say you have a scale, -1, 0, +1. Now we say BItol, remember, you have something that's negative falling into something positive. So they're saying what BItol does so far, what we know, is that it takes it away from -1. So once it's taken away from -1, it's at 0. And once it's 0, it's not usher. So if it's not usher, it's mutter. It's positive. Okay? So now, let's see how a case like this. We see that in some cases, it's not just enough for BItol to bring it to 0. It needs to have the +1. It needs to go all the way to the other extreme. So let's say you have a case of tzitzis. Let's say you have a pile of 100 pairs of kosher tzitzis. And we know that by tzitzis, it has to be woven lishma. You have to have in mind that it's going to be woven lishma and that's the only way to be kosher. So let's say, in this big pile of kosher tzitzis, you have one pair of non-kosher tzitzis, i.e. tzitzis that were not woven lishma, that fall into it. Would there be BItol in that case? So now, according to what we know, Rashi says, well, what BItol does is, since it takes it out of its negative, it gives it to 0. But by tzitzis, it's not enough to give it a 0. Tzitzis needs a stamp of kashrus. It needs to become kosher. So Rashi would hold in that case that really no, there's no BItol. There can't be BItol in that case because that's not what BItol does. BItol doesn't give it that extra stamp of kashrus. It could take it away from the negative, make it 0, but by tzitzis, it's not enough for it to be 0. It needs to be +1. Okay? This is what Rashi says. We will see that this idea where Rashi says BItol only brings it to 0 is not agreed by everyone. Okay? Now this is good. This is good stuff over here. Let's say you have, let's see, I can draw this. That. Let's see, this is. Let's say you have. Okay.
More blue.
More blue, yeah. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah tells us, let's say, you have a vat of kosher wine, okay? Let's say you have a whole bucket or whatever filled with kosher wine. Let's say you have non-kosher wine that drops of non-kosher wine fall into it. Would there be BItol in that case? You would think, well, let's just say the amount of drops, it came splash, 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 and all of a sudden the drops of the non-kosher wine became the majority of the kosher wine. Meaning that now there's more drops of non-kosher wine that fell into the standard of kosher wine. Therefore, well, since they're different, the majority would take over, meaning that all of this will be all usher. But no, that's not the case. Because there's a concept called rishon batel. Meaning, when you have Isser falling into Heter, Rishon Rishon BItol means that like every single drop that falls in automatically becomes kosher. This automatically takes over every drop. So you would never have a case where all of a sudden these non-kosher drops will make it bigger than this kosher drop. Does everyone understand? Okay. That's Rishon Rishon BItol. So, Tosfos also has the same question. The question was, well, I understand, BItol should work in that case then when it's bigger or whatever. But Tosfos, he doesn't answer. Like I'll tell you who said it, the Rabbi Yochanan. Okay. Ooh, forget the Rabbi said. Okay. Fine. So we know Rishon Rishon BItol, meaning every drop, when you have something that's Isser falls into Heter, every drop of it becomes kosher. So now here's another case. Well, let's see if we can apply Rishon Rishon BItol to this case over here. Let's say there's something called Shemitah. Shemitah is on the 7th year, whatever grew in the 7th year, it has certain limitations and Yisurim that apply to whatever you were growing over there. So fine. Let's say you planted an onion. So you have an onion, and from 0 to 7, let's say the onion grew, I don't know, 3 inches, okay? It's like a normal size for an onion. Yes, whatever. Why is there an onion? 3 inches. Let's say the farmer took it out and replanted it in the 8th year. 7th year, 3 inches. Let's say in the 8th year, for 1 year, it grew in the 8th year, it grew 4 inches. Meaning, from the time it took 0 to 7, it grew 3 inches, and in 1 year, it grew 4. It became the majority of that. So, what did we just say about Rabbi Yochanan? Rishon Rishon BItol. That should mean that every single time it grew an inch, an inch, an inch, it should automatically BItol to this. Right? Thing is, it's not like that. It doesn't answer that. Why? Because we answer Rishon Rishon BItol only applies when you have something that's kosher, that's Isser, that falls into Heter. But over here, it's not like that, because we have really the kosher falling into the Heter, not the Isser falling into the kosher falling into the Isser, not the Isser falling into the Heter. Tosfos also has this question as, well, why doesn't Rishon Rishon BItol work over here? But he gives a different mahal. He says a different answer, which we're not going to get into. Okay. Rishon Rishon BItol doesn't apply over here. This case is different than the vat of wine, because over here you had mutter falling into Isser. By the vat of wine, we had Isser falling into.
That's the difference, but why is that true?
What do you mean?
Why is that a difference? He's not giving you an answer.
I'll tell you why it's different.
The answer is you. He's saying that the difference is because it's Heter falling into
Like this. This is exactly like
Actually, that's
going
going
to
to
say.
You're saying
Okay. Like this. Right, prove this, I'll tell you right now. The difference is, when you have something, Rishon Rishon BItol only applies to something that's Isser falling into Heter. So if there's BItol over there, what it does is, it's losing its case of Isserness, because you have Isser falling into Heter. So we all know that once it's not Isser anymore, according to universal law, innocent until proven guilty, so it's kosher. But in other case,
I feel like what you said before about the pieces of meat, that Heter falling into Isser, Heter can't.
you're saying by Schutah and Niveylah?
Yeah, you're saying
So
something to
that's something totally different. We had that question also. That's something totally. It's like over there. It's a little complicated. So let's just not think about that for a moment. But in normal cases, it's good like that. Okay. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman tells us that we have machlokas based on this idea of Rashi. Now Rashi holds that BItol only takes from negative to 0, but not 0 to +1. Okay, this is exactly what I'm going to tell you. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman tells us that according to Rashi, let's say if you have, again, Isser falls into mutter, and you have mutter falls into Isser. According to Rashi, Rashi holds that, and remember, the -1, 0, and the +1. According to Rashi, he says, in the case of Itter falling into mutter, since what BItol does is it's losing its negative, so then obviously it's mutter, it's kosher. If it's not negative, it's positive. 0 is positive, it's not negative. But you have something that's mutter, just because it loses its din of plus, meaning it brings it to the 0, that's not necessarily, it's not really negative, so it's still mutter. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Sorry.
Okay, like this, Rav Chanan Wasserman says, according to Rashi, for what we know by Rashi, who only holds BItol only takes you away from the negative. So once you take away from the negative, it's going to bring you to 0. 0 is positive. It's not negative. So if you have something that's Isser and it's BItol, it'll bring you to mutter. Because if it's not Isser, it's good. You know, if you're not in jail, you're a free man. Now, if you have BItol by a case of something mutter, so once it loses, it's like plus, it's at 0. But when it's at 0, it's not really negative.
Right. You said Cain said earlier.
Okay. Now, this is according to Rashi. But we said before that Tosfos, when we had the question about the onion, he didn't really hold of what he said by Rishon Rishon BItol, meaning what Rashi holds. Tosfos has a different mahal. Tosfos says, yeah. What BItol does, he goes farther than Rashi. Not only, let's say in this case, okay, this case is really universal, everyone agrees with this. But let's say in the case of mutter versus isser. Rashi holds if it loses mutter, it comes into, it's not really isser, it's just 0, so it's not really mutter. Tosfos over here says no, if it loses its case of plus, it goes into the negative. There's a difference. This is universal. Everyone holds this, innocent till proven guilty. All Rishonim hold that. This, BItol, takes away someone's positive. Rashi says, yeah, it brings it to 0, so it's like, okay, fine, it's like it's kosher. Tosfos says, no, if it loses its positive, what BItol does is it also brings it to the negative side. So now, let's go back to the case of tzitzis. Okay? We said, let's say you have a pile of 100 kosher tzitzis that were woven the Shema, and let's say one not woven tzitzis falls into that whole pile. Would there be BItol or not? We answered by Rashi, we said, no, there's no BItol because it loses that stamp. Right? So, but it loses its stamp, but it doesn't really bring it to the whole kasha because tzitzis, it needs a stamp of kashrus. It needs to be woven lishma. So, therefore, since you have a piece that's not really kosher, you can't have BItol in that case because it can't be brought back. What would Tosfos hold though? Tosfos says no, it does bring it to the negative. So according to Tosfos in that case, yeah, all 101 pairs of tzitzis would be completely kosher. Because what it does is, it loses its negative by tzitzis, but in that case, it's also going to gain the positives. It's also going to gain the positive. Meaning that all 100 pairs of tzitzis, because, since what BItol did, well, it took away the minus, but it's also going to give it the plus, according to Tosfos. According to Rashi, he holds, no. It's just going to lose the minus. But over here by tzitzis, it needs the plus, so there can't be BItol in that case. Everyone follow?
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Okay. This is the last thing for my Chaburah. Let's say, and I'm going to throw this question out, okay? Let's say you have, looks like that. Very good. Let's say this is 90% esrog and 10% lemon. Okay? Let's say you have this little concoction, wherever it's 90% esrog, it's 10% lemon. Based off what we know by BItol, so BItol, the majority takes with the minority, meaning it should be what? Meaning it should be completely okay to use because the 90% of esrog will take with 10% of lemon. Right?
Yep.
So it should be good. But according to Rashi, what does Rashi say? He says no, because by an esrog, if you want to on sukkahs, if you want to shake the lulav in esrog, it needs to be 100% esrog. So Rashi says no, there's no BItol in that case because it's not. It needs that extra plus.
It came
Of the
together.
esrog. What?
It grew together. The Isser didn't come after the hectare. The Isser came together with the hectare.
This came together.
It grew
But
together.
it's not. But it's not an 100% esrog. It's like this hybrid.
But it's not like there was mutter. The Isser fell into it.
Mm-hmm.
Or was like the lemon or the onion where it grew afterwards. The hectare.
Okay.
This grew together. Every ounce of Isser
Okay,
hectare was
okay.
10% Isser.
So we're going to see that. So you're alluding to something later on, which we're about to say after this. But let's focus on Rashi. Rashi says no. By this case, what does BItol do? BItol doesn't give it that extra stamp of cautiousness. By esrog, you need a 100% esrog. So this is not okay. So this fits beautifully with Rashi, right? Rashi says you can't use this because there's no BItol over here because BItol needs that extra stamp. Since it doesn't have that extra stamp, BItol wouldn't do anything. But what about Tosfos? Right? Halacha says this is usher to use. You cannot use it. But Tosfos, who holds that BItol, what do you mean? BItol goes even more. It gives it that plus. So really, according to Tosfos, it should be okay. It should make it like 100% esrog. But halacha is not like that. So what does Tosfos do with this? Does everyone understand the question? Does anyone have an answer? That's not Shana. Does anyone have the answer?
What's the question?
The question is, we have this case of something, a hybrid between an esrog and a lemon, and we know that if you want to use an esrog to be shaken with the lulav, it needs to be completely 100% esrog. So there we BItol this case. According to Rashi, who remember holds that what does BItol do? BItol just takes it from one thing and brings it to 0. So over here, just because it loses its form of -10, it doesn't bring it to that 10%, to that plus sign. And halacha says this is usher to use, so if it's beautifully with Rashi. But we said by Tosfos, then we said no. Tosfos says BItol does give it that extra 10%. It does give it that positive. So how does Tosfos answer this? Halacha says it's usher. Tosfos said should be its mutter. So how do we answer for Tosfos?
You made my suggestion, they group together.
So we're going to say like this. We're going to go back to what is BItol. Remember, we had machlokas, physical halacha. Tosfos is going to answer like this. This is the end of the Chaburah. Tosfos is going to say, there is no BItol in this case. Why? Because what's BItol? It's where you have two different things. Let's say you have the case of Shatnez. Remember the case of Shatnez? If you